All right, everybody. Welcome to this short notice pop-up session focused on the escalating wildfire situation both in Southern California with the line fire and in Western Nevada with the Davis fire. The Davis fire is new just within the last few hours, burning south of Reno and causing large-scale evacuations and apparently already burning structures. The line fire began yesterday in the transverse ranges of Southern California. I guess it's depending on whose definition, whether or not that's part of the transverse ranges is a point of geographic discussion. But anyway, this is a fire that started yesterday. There was some chance, some hope that it was going to be contained or that it wouldn't go extended. And unfortunately, with the extreme weather conditions that are currently occurring in Southern California, with temperatures that have been close to all-time record highs over the past couple of days in some areas, and then coupled today with an outbreak of what resemble late monsoonal thunderstorms that unfortunately did not bring a whole lot of rain to the fire region, but what they did bring were very gusty upslope and outflow and downburst winds, and allowed that fire burning in the San Bernardino Mountains to blow up and attain pretty ferocious pyrocumulonimbus status, with the fire generating its own thunderstorms as it continues to do so right now. So two major fires, two different parts of the West, one technically not in California, but I'll allow it for the purposes of this conversation. And there's a lot of folks who live in Reno, Tahoe area who follow this channel and Weather West. And just wanted to recap the recent weather that led up to this in a moment, but I did first want to dig into the fires. By the way, it's also quite a serious fire day across Oregon and Idaho and other western states as well, so this is not isolated to California, unfortunately, as expected and as discussed in the most recent Weather West blog post. Second fire season is coming and is now arguably here in California. This is the next escalation that was a bit concerning, and we don't even have offshore or Santa Ana winds in the mix yet. We're still in sort of heat and thunderstorm season, so we'll get into that in a moment. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start sharing my screen, since I have a lot of things pulled up that I think will be of interest, and so you're going to see the infinite mirror for a moment. Apologies. But then hopefully I don't crash anything too crazily here as I transition. You're going to see me with this, and now you're going to see Watch Duty. Starting with the line fire, again, this is a fire burning both within state lands and now into the San Bernardino National Forest. So this is an old fire perimeter. This is not accurate. I'm going to bring my screen drawing tool up here now because, again, this is the Watch Duty app, which I've become increasingly accustomed to using in situations like this. This is an old fire perimeter. It is now running, maybe not the best expression, up towards running springs. I don't know exactly what the perimeter is right now. I don't think we can get that from satellite, but apparently at some point along the highway here, it's already along the highway or has potentially jumped. So this is unfortunately a fire that has been moving upslope directly toward Running Springs, Arrow Bear Lake, and there are now mandatory evacuations in effect for the entire community of Running Springs and Arrow Bear Lake, as well as a fairly large swath of land that doesn't have as high of a population, but is nonetheless, there are probably people up there. It is the weekend, it's a recreational area, people live up there, so this is not just affecting Running Springs. It's less imminent, but this fire does also pose potentially a threat to the Lake Arrowhead area, although right now the greatest concern is with respect to the Running Springs area at the moment. Just wanted to make sure that everybody is seeing what I'm intending them to see. Hold on a moment here. It looks like there might be just a little issue with that. Okay, no, it's just a little bit of a lag. Sorry, this is what happens when I don't have time to prep everything in advance. Okay, back to the map here. I want to see if I can turn on the satellite map. Yeah, okay, so this is still out of date. So these are the satellite-derived fire parameters. These are often 6 to 12 hours out of date, but even here we see the fire footprint is a lot bigger than the official footprint suggests. I bet you this is the area where the fire is crossing the highway, but it's also expanded greatly to the north toward Running Springs. Let's take a look at some of the cameras. Obviously, that's let's run this for a 30-minute view. Bring this up. So you can see this is pretty, you can see how it's burning upslope pretty aggressively. You can see the thunderstorm clouds that are building right on top of the fire and how that has posed some challenges there. Bring the cameras, these are cameras right above and therefore just to the south of Running Springs. Unfortunately, these cameras are pretty close to being in the fire. So this is how close the fire is to Running Springs. There's a 30-minute loop. You can see the active flames cresting the ridge. I'll make this a little bit bigger so it's easier to see it. Zoom forward about halfway through. So this is about 10 minutes ago. There are active flames popping up in this image as this runs up slope. So if we look at a different angle, let's run through 30 minutes of this really quick. The fire is not in Running Springs yet, but you can see there are structures up on the ridge, and this fire is immediately threatening them right now as it makes a run uphill. This fire is in that canyon, making a run to the north, right towards Running Springs. And you can see how windy it is in the foreground as well. Looking at some other cameras, this one is between Running Springs and Lake Arrowhead. It's smoky, you can't see a lot, so I'll move on. Here's a camera looking north from the south at the fire, and I'm actually going to, it's quite a dirty image, but I'm going to put this back 2 hours. So here's a long loop. Hopefully it'll pull this up without crashing anything. Okay, you can see this fire, the smoke is blowing in all different directions as this massive pyrocumulonimbus or fire thunderstorm cloud, I'm going to pause it at various frames, you can see it building in this vicinity right above the fire over the past several hours. This fire has been building, you can see that up in the upper left of the image. That's a very tall pyrocumulonimbus cloud. This fire was intense enough and occurring in ambient atmospheric conditions that were sufficiently unstable to allow it to develop its own thunderstorm complex on top of it. And while there have been brief showers of rain, the main effect has been a lot of lightning and a lot of erratic and strong gusty winds. You can see the outflow blew the smoke towards the camera. That's actually why it's become so hazy. So this is still going on in the background there. So now I'm going to zoom out. That's the line fire right now. If you're in or near the Running Springs, Arrowbird Lake area, there are now mandatory evacuations, and you really should leave. This thing is moving fast, erratically, and you're going to have a long drive to get out of there because you can't take 330 into the valley. That is closed. The fire is essentially there. You're going to have to go one or the other way. You're going to have to go either east or west. East on 18 or west on, I think that's still 18. So I'm going to zoom out for now. You can see there are red flag warnings in place in other parts of Southern California, but not where that fire is currently burning. Just a brief aside, there is also a new large fire in Orange County, the Roblar fire. If I pull up the quick view on this, I'm not going to spend too much time because I don't think this is immediately threatening as many people as the other ones are. But you can see how active this is. Again, this is another very aggressively burning fire that's going to detract from resource availability in Southern California right now. Okay, but now I'm going to jump back up all the way north. You can see there's other fires, but the one of interest is the Davis fire. It's listed as 500 acres. It's likely larger than that. Again, this just gives you a general sense of where the fire is. It's just west of Washoe City, right near the lake, the Washoe Lake. So it's we're on the north side of the lake. I know some folks had originally hoped that it was farther south along the west side of the lake and it would run into the lake. Unfortunately, it looks like it's just far enough to the north that it has room to run to the north and east if it sort of moves in that direction. And there are strong winds right now. This is a wind-driven fire, again, between the south side of Reno, which is to the north, and Carson City. So unfortunately, this is also a pretty populated area. So this is a fire that is already burning in the WUI, in the wildland-urban interface. And that means that there are immediately people and structures at risk. 580, Interstate 580 is closed. Other area roads are closed. There are mandatory evacuations in this vicinity as well. And there are some reports that this fire may already be burning some structures, unfortunately. So let me see if I can pull up a couple of camera views here. Let's see what the closest one is. This one, yes, this one gives you a pretty good view. I'm going to pull up the last hour of this camera. You can see how it's wind-driven by the fact the smoke plume here, unlike in Southern California, is not rising straight up, but it's lying down horizontally. So you can see that it's being pushed by that relatively strong horizontal wind. That camera's fairly far away. This one's closer. I'm not sure if it's got a good view. Unfortunately, it does have a pretty good view. Okay, let's pull up the last hour of this camera here, just making sure that everyone's seeing live streaming that they're supposed to be seeing. Yes, looks like they are. Just wanted to verify. Okay, yikes, that is an ugly look. The reason why this is so ugly, wow, I had not seen this before. You can see, okay, this is a pretty dramatic camera view, so I'm going to replay it and then bring my screen drawing tool back. Alright, so bring it back to the beginning. So you can see the flank of the fire is along here. You can sort of see it's moving parallel to the wind. So the wind, of course, as you'd expect, is blowing like this. It's stronger aloft than it is at the surface. So you can see this plume is sheared. So it's bending over like this. That means that embers that are generated in this region of the fire can get lofted up and fall back down and spot in front of the fire. And so I'm exaggerating a little bit in terms of the distance. I don't think you'd actually see spotting that far out under these conditions, but just to illustrate what this looks like, I'm going to bring this back up to show it again. You can see all of the, I'm going to bring these away. Whoops. You can see all of the retardant dropping air tankers along this flank because A, it's the flank that's most accessible. It's the one along which fire retardant would be most likely to make a difference. It's also really the only one that's safe and accessible for aircraft right along the edge here because they can't fly directly into this plume. So even though, unfortunately, there are some structures in the way within the plume right now, some of which may be burning, that's not accessible to air crews, generally speaking. So they're going to come in on the flanking line. You may see some around the heel of the fire down here as well to contain that. There's structures down there, possibly also on the other side of the fire over here. But where you're going to have more difficulty with this is in front. And here's the challenge. You can see this is in a pretty forested region down here, but transitions to grass and scrub up here. Under conditions like this, which are very dry and windy, both of these areas are going to be pretty flammable with a wind-driven fire like this. This fire is immediately threatening the residential areas sort of down here right now, but with this wind, this really could pose a threat up in here as well as we go through the evening. Strong winds are expected to continue through the evening, so I'm going to run this one more time, or actually I'm going to refresh the page just to see if we have a new image. Yeah, so it's not, it's looking kind of ugly. We'll see how effective the retardant is there, but it sounds like there are some major problems already on this fire. And this is just I don't know if this is current, but this generally shows you where the evacuation area was as of about an hour ago or so. that does encompass a number of subdivisions and populated areas. So this is a fairly significant deal south of Reno. Okay, I'm going to quickly check the comments so I can see what's going on if anything is really urgent. Okay, a couple of folks mentioned the live ABC News footage. Oh wow, yeah, I actually have that pulled up, and so what you're going to see is a double live stream. Sorry, ABC7, but I'm on your news channel often enough. Hopefully, you won't get too upset with me restreaming this for a moment and giving some commentary on top of it. I have the audio turned off. This is ABC7 in Southern California. It looks like the right is the not live. That was recently, but earlier. The left image is a little bit messier, I think, because of all of the downburst winds spreading smoke around in a messy way. But it does give you a sense that this fire is burning in close proximity to major populated areas. And on the right, you can kind of see the extreme level of fire behavior on the right. Fire whirls, long flame lengths, pyrocumulonimbus clouds. This is not super, the live view is not super enlightening, so I'm actually going to move away from this, show some other information, go back and look at the question here. Okay, so I want to show some satellite imagery. First of all, here's the west-wide view, and there is a whole heck of a lot of smoke up there for the first week in September. There are thunderstorms occurring across parts of California, Nevada, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, all of which are associated with some dryish lightning and are starting new fires. Take a look at this. Yikes. So all of the little black dots, and again, this is at the scale of the entire western U.S., so these are not actually that little. These are all major wildfires that can be seen from space. So you can see the Davis Fire there, northeast of Lake Tahoe. That's brand new today. But look at all these other huge fires in central Oregon. Literally dozens of fires up in northern Idaho, southwest Montana. Another big fire in western Wyoming. This is a very high level of fire activity right now throughout the West. So I just wanted to show that broader perspective before I zoom in. Okay. I'm going to bring my screen drawing tool back. This, of course, is Lake Tahoe. The fire up by Reno may be a little bit hard to see in this map, but I wanted to point something else out first. Do you notice this region of clouds that has this sharp edge, the sharp back edge, right along here? This is effectively a weak mountain wave cloud. You can see how there's no clouds on the west side of the mountain, but there's clouds developing in these continuous streaks to the east of the Sierra Nevada crest. So I didn't draw the crest perfectly, but that's roughly where the axis of the highest mountains is in this vicinity. So what's happening is once you get around the summit, maybe we'll just draw a dashed line to. Once you get east of the summit here. Okay, that's probably easier to see. The mountain wave is in this region, meaning that there is there are strong winds aloft. So the winds, of course, aloft are blowing in this direction. You can kind of tell by the motion of the clouds and the fact that these clouds are forming perpendicular to this barrier. So what's a 90-degree angle roughly from the crest of the mountains? That's just about here. So the upper level winds are like this. But at the surface, what you have are lower level winds. Let me clear that. You have winds that are blowing more like this at the surface, but are blowing. Well, let me redraw that briefly just for a moment here. The winds at the surface are blowing a little bit more in this direction, but aloft are blowing a little bit more in that direction. So that explains why the clouds, and what a mountain wave is essentially is if you have some relatively stable air above a mountain range that's being impinged on by these strong winds perpendicular to the mountain range. Of course, the axis of the mountain range is roughly like that. The winds are like this. You get this. You get an airflow over the top of the mountain, that kind of in vertical cross section. So now I'm drawing vertically on a two-dimensional map. Kind of looks like this. And so the air is being forced up right where these clouds are appearing, but that forcing up is weakening a little bit downwind. So you can kind of tell that the upward motion begins about here, and there's probably some downward motion to the a little bit farther east. So we're getting some air motion that kind of looks like this over the top of the mountains. But the main issue here, I think, rather than, this is not a particularly strong mountain wave, so sometimes you can get very strong winds, 60, 70 miles an hour. We don't have winds like that right now. So I still think the main issue is just the prevailing southwest winds, which are pretty strong, 30 to 40 mile an hour gusts or more locally in the vicinity of this fire. But since this fire is not obvious, it's being hidden a little bit by the clouds, I'm going to shift over to infrared, and of course here it's quite obvious. Where the fire is, that's the Davis fire. So Reno is about here. Highway 395 goes down about there. Or sorry, 580. 385, I guess, is, excuse me, get the numbers mixed up occasionally. All right, so this is what it looks like right now up in Northern California. This is the Davis fire. I'm going to bring this back. I'm going to go back down to Southern California, zoom in on the line fire. And one thing you can see is that there's a whole heck of a lot of thunderstorm activity. So each of these bubbling tops here, these are all the tops of major cumulonimbus clouds. So heavy rain, flash flooding in the desert out here right now. But this is where the fire is. And if you notice, this is real imagery looking down live from space. Do you notice this cloud looks a little bit browner than the other clouds around it? Well, that is because half of it is smoke. This is emanating directly from the line fire. And look how it's kind of just stationary. This pyrocumulonimbus cloud is mainly just sitting right over the fire, and it's not dropping a lot of water. What it's doing is most of the rain that's falling is actually falling in this vicinity to the east of the fire, but the major updraft, lightning, and wind is occurring right where the fire is. You can even see the outflow winds from this fire pushing smoke through the valley, across the Inland Empire, and even into the eastern San Fernando Valley right now. So this is why the air quality is going downhill, perhaps as far west as the LA Basin. This thunderstorm outflow is bringing the smoke from this fire. But just look how aggressively that thing is burning. If I bring up the infrared imagery, it's quite clear what's going on. This, of course, is the line fire, and it's being hidden by, once again, a redeveloping pyrocumulonimbus cloud right on top of it in the most recent frame. So you see how it disappears? Well, the fire didn't go out. It's just being covered by a very thick anvil. Also note other major fire in northern Baja across the border, and another fire, although it looks like it's doing a little bit better, down in Orange County. So I'm going to quickly take a look at comments. All right, let's see. What have we got here? Okay, so looks like nothing extremely urgent. Let's take a look. Here's another live look. Here's what the Davis fire looks like right now, just to get an update. And then go down to Running Springs camera, look at the line fire. This is what the Running Springs camera looks like. It's pretty socked in at the moment, so not telling us a lot of new information. Is this telling us anything new about the... It's too smoky to see much. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to show is radar imagery. Okay, a lot going on in this. This has been a very active radar all day. So this is, by the way, this is from the Santa Ana Mountains radar site in Orange County. It's always tricky to find the right radar site at a given place in Southern California because the complex topography and mountains intersect radar beams in awkward ways. But let's, whoops, I didn't mean to draw that there. Okay, so this is the general vicinity of the line fire. This is Running Springs. Whoops, I need to get the drawing tool back. Running Springs is here. Big Bear Lake is here. Big Bear is not immediately at risk. Lake Arrowhead is here and a little bit closer to the fire, although still not as immediately threatened as Running Springs. Running Springs is really where the concern is right now. And so I'm going to zoom in a little bit more on this. Okay, so this is the regular radar reflectivity on the left that you're used to seeing on the evening news. On the right, though, this is what's known as the correlation coefficient. So it's essentially measuring literally the correlation in the hydrometeor size. So how similar are the things that are reflecting the radar beam to one another? If it's rain, they should be pretty similar to one another. But if it is, for example, smoke, then of course, or ash, that smoke and ash are going to have very different size particles. Sometimes the ash, of course, is big enough, it's like coin size, like quarter or silver dollar size, you can pick it up. Whereas other smoke particles are, so fine that there's a risk of you breathing them into your lungs. That's why smoke is harmful. So there's a very large difference in the particle size. And so the correlation coefficient between them is low because they are not consistent with one another. So with that in mind, the high correlation coefficient values are the red values that are showing up. So right now, for example, let's find a region that has some nice high values. I'm going to go west. Okay, here we go. This is helpful as a point of comparison. So do you see this little thunderstorm that popped up and has since faded over in this vicinity? I'm going to move over just a little bit more so you can see it better. Okay, so this you can see there's a pop-up thunderstorm. By the way, this was a mostly dry thunderstorm. That lightning strike over here could have sparked a fire, a new one. But you can see that this is about a red blob. And that means that it is precipitation. It was not made of smoke. So we see that there was a shower there, a thunderstorm, and we see that it was rain. Okay, good, that's not a smoke plume. However, we go over to Running Springs. And what we see is there are, so this, by the way, these are false echoes. This is the crest of the mountains. So that you can mostly ignore. But down here, this is, down here, these are real radar echoes. And notice what's going on here is that a lot of so there's a mix of precipitation and smoke in this area. So right now, this vicinity, this is essentially all smoke. So this is sort of where the pyrocumulonimbus is strongest. Over in this vicinity, there is a mix of smoke and actual liquid hydrometeors. So what we're seeing is there probably are some brief showers mixing in with the pyrocumulonimbus cloud here, and that might be resulting in a little bit of precipitation on the fire. The problem is we're not getting sustained heavy precipitation in the fire zone, and the main fire activity, the updraft, is essentially over here in this sort of X region here, where you can see, and most of the rain has been falling to the east. So there might be some active fire line in this middle overlap zone that's getting precipitation falling on it, but unfortunately, this fire has been generating its own pyrocumulonimbus clouds quite dramatically for hours, and it looks like this is continuing. Now what I want to bring up is the echo tops, so we can see how tall these clouds are. So the pyrocumulonimbus clouds in this vicinity have been running up to 40,000 feet, and here they are again, 42,000 feet. Let's see how high they get. Yeah, so these are very tall clouds. 42,000 feet is consistent with the height of a supercell thunderstorm. So in other words, this doesn't look like a particularly nasty thunderstorm, but that the radar isn't, but the reflectivity isn't quite telling the story, because this cloud is getting up to 40 to 45,000 feet tall in some instances, and it isn't producing as much cloud to ground lightning now. But earlier in the afternoon and the evening, it produced a lot of lightning in this area, and it's quite possible there could be new ignitions. I'm not putting X's in specific places. This is just a guess. There could be new fire ignitions. Also, as I mentioned, these isolated storms here, it's quite possible that new fires are going to pop up in the overnight hours into tomorrow from the lightning that's already occurred. So this is a pretty serious situation that's not really showing any sign of diminishing. So I'll bring that correlation coefficient back just to emphasize that this fire does not appear to have self-extinguished. If anything, it's done quite the opposite. Okay, let's see if there's any updates from watch duty from an evacuation perspective. I don't know if folks can see this, but pretty much this just says that all of Running Springs and adjacent areas, Arrow Bear Lake, the whole region is under an evacuation. So the map is almost not important because it's anything on the map is under evacuation. Okay, I'm gonna go back, take a look at some questions. So I'm gonna bring my camera back for a moment. All right, so what are we seeing here? So I'm going to quickly go through, read some of the questions that have come through, see if there's anything urgent. Yeah, lots of folks pointing out that they can see the major fire activity and the pyrocumulonimbus activity all around them. Ian mentions Ian is a Lake Arrowhead resident who is packing up. Mentions it's very real, very scary. I wish you good luck and also urge you to take it seriously up there because it's this fire has room to grow. And unfortunately, the weather conditions over the next few days are not going to be favorable. So it's going to be very hot and relatively unstable over the next few days with some increasing winds next week. So it's not 100% clear exactly which direction the fire will spread after tonight, but it has room to grow now in essentially 3 directions, and there are population centers and pretty dense dry vegetation in between the fire and those population centers at the moment. So good luck. It's a comment from RJ on informal online scuttlebutt that the line fire could turn into a paradise-like situation. I want to urge people to take it seriously without necessarily making a comparison to that extremely catastrophic and dire scenario. This is a pretty serious scenario, and there could be a wild and urban interface fire emergency stemming from this in the coming hours. I think the difference is, at least as far as my understanding, is that this was an evacuation that has already been ordered well before the fire arrived in town. It's not 100% certain that it will arrive in town, although it certainly could sooner rather than later. And that the communication systems, at least as far as I am aware, are still online. And there are also 2 major egress routes from the area. You can take the highway east or west to get out, at least as far as I am aware at this time, unless there's another incident somewhere else. So I don't think it's the same situation. Nonetheless, it is very serious. And if you're in the Running Springs area, I think it's already time to have left. So hopefully not a same situation. Again, the Davis fire is also quite serious up south of Reno. Again, there are more routes to get out of the area there generally because it's not so constrained to a mountain highway. But it is burning in the wildland urban interface. There likely is going to be structural loss if there hasn't been already, and so that makes it a very serious situation as well, especially because it is a wind-driven event up there too. So these are 2 very serious fires. There is real risk to life and property in both of them, and unfortunately I do think that both of them probably will burn structures. Hopefully not many, but that is a possibility with each of these, especially I think with the line fire, given what's currently going on. Sarah mentions that the Davis fire is already heading into the suburbs of South Reno, as I mentioned. There are folks evacuating up there. Good luck, stay safe, glad you're taking it seriously. Comment that there's lots of wildfire smoke all along the U.S.-Canadian border up in northwestern Washington. I mentioned that when I showed the western U.S. map. It's actually quite impressive. Large amount of smoke from many fires across a broad region. Comment that it's been gusty and windy in Carson City today, hot and windy. Question from Sarah about whether there are winds in the forecast for Reno this week. Unfortunately, yes. And as this heat wave breaks in the west early to middle of this coming week, unfortunately, there may even be some strong winds. So red flag conditions are there's currently a red flag warning for the fire zone up there by the Davis fire near Reno, and that is likely to continue for at least a day or two and maybe reissued later this week. So, the fire risk will remain high for existing or new fires in that context. I am taking a quick look at a few things myself just to see if we can more clearly determine what's going on from the air right now. So I'm looking at some of the same things we saw earlier. Yeah, so I'll take a bit of a moment to talk about the weather that led up to these fires. Of course, we already know that in some parts of California, 2023, I'm living in the past, 2024 was the hottest summer on record, mainly driven by extremely hot conditions in June and especially July. August was not so hot and actually offered some relief, but the summer was still very hot and dry overall in most spots outside of the North Coast. And coastal Southern California, though, has been sort of a bit of an anomaly in that it was not remarkably hot for most of the summer until, unfortunately, right now, where the last few days have featured some of the hottest temperatures ever recorded in some parts of Southern California. So a lot of places that got within a few degrees of all-time record highs for any month of the year, and a few places that actually tied them. Burbank, for example, saw 2 days this week that tied its all-time record high temperature of 114 degrees. Lots of other monthly and daily records in Southern California, and record-breaking heat up in the Pacific Northwest this week as well. So all of that fire activity that had been suppressed by the favorable conditions in August just blew right back up in the past several days across a really wide region. And now we've added new fire activity in Southern California. And I don't see any reprieve, really, in the Southern California fire activity for some time to come. It will be cooler next week, but it will be windier, and there won't be any rain down south, aside from the isolated type thunderstorms we're seeing this weekend. Up in Northern California, it's going to be a mixed bag. It will get a lot cooler this week and a lot windier, with a more significant trough coming in about 5 or 6 days from now. There is a chance of some showers up in parts of Northern California once we get to that point in 5 or 6 days, but they will be preceded by strong, dry winds ahead of it. And it remains to be seen whether there's a widespread wetting rainfall in some mountain and north coast areas or not. This will not be a rain event, it looks like, in the Bay Area, and probably not in the Tahoe area, but it might be along the north coast, the Shasta Mountains, and some other spots in the northern Sierra. that could be good news, but again, I think we're talking about a few tenths of an inch of rain at most in most of these places, and probably less than that, maybe zero. And what it might be followed by is potentially the first north or offshore wind event of the season in central and southern California. So that could pose some renewed fire threats, particularly for the fires that are currently burning in the Sierra Nevada and in the mountains of southern California. So that it will be cooler, which will help, but it will not necessarily be lower fire risk later this week. And there is still likely a month or two at least of hot, dry weather in Southern California as we head into offshore wind season. Some of the fires that may have either ignited today from lightning or are already burning could still be burning weeks from now in some spots, depending on how remote and how large they get, and that could be a factor at play when we get to that offshore wind season, which will likely begin imminently and perhaps as soon as later this week, if that offshore trough is more of an inside slider. So the best case scenario is it sort of slides right down the coast and brings a few showers to Northern California and only breezy conditions. The worst case scenario is it essentially is an inside slider. The low pressure system drops down into the Great Basin, misses Northern California, brings little or no precipitation, but just a lot of wind. Either scenario is still possible at the moment, but this is turning into slider season, if you will, these low pressure systems that have a northwest to southeast trajectory, but they can have quite different impacts if they're inland of the coast over the Great Basin, inside sliders bringing offshore autumn wind events versus closer to the coast bringing early season occasional showers, still breezy, can still elevate fire risk, and usually doesn't bring season ending rainfall in any case, but usually lower risk than those farther inland Great Basin sliders. And just checking to see if we have any new urgent comments. Okay, so I'm gonna go back, take another look. Actually, I'm going to not share it. I have some Twitter tags open, but I'm not going to share them visually on the screen because unfortunately these days you never know what you're going to see with a Twitter hashtag, so I'm going to look at them quickly myself, see if anything major has popped up, share them with you if so. It does sound like evacuations on the line fire continue to expand. So if you're even remotely close to that area, I think it's really time to be paying close attention. Lots of dramatic photos of the pyrocumulonimbus cloud on the line fire. Looks like there's a bunch of structure defense firefighting groups in Running Springs proper. So again, I don't think it's fair to call it a paradise-like scenario, serious though it is. But the fire does continue to move up the drainage, so it is going to be a place that's at risk tonight. A lot of air resources over these fires. We can see right now that there is long traffic jams on the mountain highways leaving Running Springs and adjacent areas right now. So it's one reason why it's a good idea to leave earlier than you think you might need to, because you might not be able to leave as quickly as you want to. I don't think that the highway itself is at emergency risk given the number of resources there and given the weather conditions. But again, the towns in the evacuation zone right now are imminently threatened. That is the reality with this. Continuing to look at a few more pieces just to see if there's any new pieces of information coming in. Okay, so that's the line fire. Hearing that the evacuations are a little bit chaotic, but again, it's there's a couple of different routes of egress, so there are options. Taking a quick look at the radar again on my end. Looks like Running Springs may have even had a brief bout of precipitation from one of these showers earlier, but certainly not enough to really meaningfully mitigate fire risk. There are significant power outages in the vicinity of both of these fires. Sounds like a couple tens of thousands of people now without power up by Washoe City, by the Davis fire, and then another couple tens of thousands of people potentially out of power in the mountains down by Running Springs with the line fire. Yeah, there's some interesting footage of that mountain wave. It's not a very strong one, but I mentioned it earlier in the satellite imagery, and there's some visual confirmation of that on the Davis fire south of Reno. It does look like the evacuation orders and warnings on the Davis fire are expanding. The Truckee Meadows fire is confirming that there have been at least 6 structures lost, and the evacuations were just expanded to include a wider swath of the South Reno suburbs, as well as an evacuation warning all the way to the east, closer to Virginia City, for the Virginia City Highlands. So, they are preparing for this fire to have a pretty big footprint, it seems like right now. Let's see here. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again as maybe getting closer to wrapping this up. But I do want to show some more imagery before leaving tonight. Whoops, that's my other screen. Okay, so as I mentioned again, I'm gonna sort of review some of the stuff from earlier and update based on new conditions. So you can actually see this mountain wave effect better now. There is now sort of a couple different layers of it. So check this one out. This one is even more distinct. So you can see the flow perpendicular to the barrier is like that. So I'm going to erase what I drew so you can see. But the mountains essentially end here. So you can tell actually by the vegetation. You see where the tree line ends and it turns into grass and scrub in the desert east of the mountain. Well, this is essentially the mountain wave is occurring, and there could be a bit of a parallax effect from the satellite, so it's possible that this is actually a little bit further west in the real world because of the angle, the limb angle of the satellite looking down at Earth. It's not looking perfectly straight down, but anyway, the point is there's this line of clouds that is sort of denoting the mountain wave. So in a vertical sense, you have the mountain air that's going up and then down over the mountain into the valley. So it's windy on the lee side in the valley. Same thing happening down here in the Reno Tahoe area, and this includes the Davis fire. This includes the Davis fire zone. Let me just make sure I'm sharing once again what I was planning on. I need to remember to always check that. Okay, good. You're seeing what I'm hoping that you'll see. Another mountain wave, just like is happening up there over the Sierra Crest down here. The fire in question is in this vicinity here, south of Reno. Another mountain wave. So there's both strong sort of southwesterly to westerly winds, and also a little bit of a mountain wave, a downward component of air moving down on the lee side of the mountains. This is sort of a classic fire spread situation. In that setting, again, pulling up the infrared, the Davis fire shows up very clearly. I don't think it's really weakening. I think it's actually just behind some of those clouds right now. Okay, and then I go back to Southern California, take a look at see what we can see. Um, so again, the line fires in here, it is behind a cloud right now, a cumulonimbus cloud. It is possible that the fire has, the intensity has waned a little bit over the past hour, although it's hard to know because this could just be behind a cloud and all the cameras continue to indicate it's burning quite intensely. Let me pull up the radar again and take a look. Okay, again, a few different features. Let's see here. Again, this line of echoes, this is just the mountains. This is just the radar beam bouncing off the crest of the mountains. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there's a mix of echoes here. There's smoke plus actual precipitation in this region. The good news is it does look like some of the fire zone is probably getting some precipitation in this area, but not so much in this area, which is probably the part that poses the greatest threat to Running Springs, Lake Arrowhead anyway. So the level of pyrocumulonimbus activity has died down a bit. There is some isolated showers occurring, but not over the main fire area. And the other thing that's interesting, take a look at this. Do you see this little feature that's sort of developed on the west side? That looks like it's an outflow boundary from the fire itself. So this is going to result in a smoke front moving through Highland, through San Bernardino, Fontana, Inland Empire as it goes to the west. So gusty winds and smoke contained in this little line. And also an indication that the column kind of blew up and then burned itself out. So there's sort of emanating near the fire, and you kind of have outflow winds flowing out in all directions. So this can sometimes result in the fire calming down a little bit temporarily, but the problem is it can cause spotting. So there's probably some embers blowing up in this direction, and so those might pop up and become more of a problem later tonight. So this is a slightly less dramatic feature right now. If I zoom out, you see that the other thunderstorms essentially have died down. So the one feature of interest remains associated with the line fire just south of Running Springs. I'll bring back the watch duty map. Let's see what we've got going on here. I'll bring the cameras back for one last view here. These are still smoked in. Look at that red sun. Okay, this gives a pretty good view. This is live. Okay, so you can kind of see. This is interesting. I bet you. So this is a prediction. What I'm going to see. I don't know for sure. But you see how the fire lines roughly along here. The winds, I think, were initially upslope, so up canyon, driving this fire very aggressively. What may have just happened with those outflow boundaries, they may be pushing the fire back onto itself, which would be some temporary good news. But let's see what the last hour time lapse looks like. I think we might see this happening before. Yeah, as you can see this blowing upslope. This looked pretty bad. I mean, this was earlier in this live stream. Even this is a pretty rapid shift. Upslope wind looks bad, and then all of a sudden, yep, okay, there it is. That's exactly what happened. Wow, look at that wind shift. That's pretty remarkable, actually, to see that in real time. So the fire line is still here. It's not as intense, which is good, short-term good news. The problem is this is a remote area. They're not going to be able to put hand crews in here overnight. There's a limited amount of water dropping helicopters that can do anything at night. Once the winds return to their normal weak upslope or neutral position, this fire will probably start advancing upslope again, given how hot it is right now and how dry. So this fire is not out, but it looks like the thunderstorm initially blew it up, and then at least on this flank may have blown it back on itself temporarily. So that, I'll take that for now. All right, and then I'm going to go back and look at the Davis fire. Officially up to 1,500 acres now, and probably once again larger based on imagery. So this is one camera view. That's kind of a distant one. This one gives you a bit of a distant view as well. This was the one that has had the best view, so let's bring it up. Let's take a look at what the last 15 minutes have looked. That still looks pretty ugly in terms of it being pushed directly toward the wildland urban interface in this vicinity, so that's really not what you want to see. Here's the adjacent camera. Still looks like a wind-driven fire. The only good news is it's easier to get resources in ahead of this fire in front of it than it is down in Running Springs, because Reno is up here and all the firefighting apparatus can go directly north to south into the fire zone, so not as many accessibility issues here. But again, red flag warnings in effect. It is windy, it is dry, and it's going to stay windy and dry, and that's going to pose a problem. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. You're going to see my face for just another minute or so. All right, well, I think that this might be about it for the evening session, but I'll just recap a few things. Record-breaking heat in Southern California the last few days is only slowly fading. Heat warnings are still and advisories are still in effect through Monday, so this will be slow to fade. This will mean that the fires that are burning now will burn through very hot conditions at high elevations for the next few days at least. Cooler conditions throughout the west later this week as a trough moves in from the northwest. Rain up in Washington, Oregon. That will help some with the fires there, at least as far east as the Cascades. A chance of some rain in far northern California as well, and if we're lucky, maybe even a few showers into the northern Sierra. But the downside of that is this trough will usher in cooler, yes, and locally showery, but also very windy conditions with little or no precipitation south of sort of Reno, Tahoe, Mendocino County line. So no precipitation expected south of that point, just the winds. It will be cooler, but the winds might not be a favorable development for existing fires. And then moving forward, right now, no indications of widespread rain. It does look like the extreme heat of recent days in Southern California will be gone once it departs on Monday or so, to not come back for some time. But that may not be the last extreme heat event of the season. The seasonal models continue to suggest a high likelihood of above average conditions for most of the southwest and interior west through the autumn. And offshore wind season has not yet begun. There is a chance that the first offshore wind event of the season could occur late this coming week, if that trough turns into more of an inside slider versus an outside slider. So I'll keep my fingers crossed for a more outside trajectory, a few more showers versus wind. But if it takes an inside trajectory, it's going to be almost all wind, no showers, and that would be the worst fire weather outcome. Either way, no fire season ending precipitation is expected essentially everywhere except for possibly along the north coast, where arguably that already happened in August. So fire season will remain very much alive throughout most of the west, except for, again, perhaps western Washington and Oregon west of the Cascades and the north coast of California. Everyone else that you saw that active fire activity on the satellite imagery earlier, they're going to stay pretty active and continue to pop up during hot, dry, and or windy conditions for the next few weeks until season-ending rain or snow arrives. And again, in California, outside of the north coast, there's really just no indication of that happening in the next couple of weeks, which is not unusual. It is only September. Season-ending rains usually would not arrive in the north till October, and perhaps in the south till November. A lot of variability in that number, but generally speaking, that's what we see. And if anything this year, there's a slight tilt in the odds towards a later than average start to the rainy season, along with those warmer than average conditions expected more often than not into the fall. So there will be a reprieve in temperature. It's going to get cooler but windier, with some northern California showers possible, at least to the northern California. But fire season is still here. Offshore wind season has not yet even begun, although we might see a taste of it later this week. And what I'm concerned about later this fall is the level of dryness that we now have across a broad swath of the west once windy fall conditions, whether that's offshore winds in California or downslope winds in other parts of the Rockies, become more common, because it does look like we're going to see some of those wind events before we see fire season ending precipitation in both of those places this year. So if you're in Running Springs, Arrow Bear Lake, that vicinity, it is time to leave. You're under an official evacuation order. Same thing in some of the far southern suburbs of Reno as you get close to Washoe Lake. And these are two serious fires. I think it's possible that the Davis fire up in Nevada, it's going to be a major concern throughout the night into tomorrow. It's possible that will be a fire that's less of a concern a couple days from now, but I think the line fire is likely to be with us for some time. It's very large, it's burning in very rugged, very dry region with a lot of dense vegetation, and the weather conditions are very unfavorable for that fire to be corralled fully anytime soon. It does look like the explosive nuclear explosion looking pyrocumulonimbus cloud has finally faded over that fire and maybe even produced a couple of rain showers over some portions of the fire footprint, but that not before it sort of blew the fire out across lines, across highways, caused it to spread very rapidly upslope. So that storm cloud did in fact produce more net harm than good. And it's likely that activity will pick up once again once the usual diurnal wind patterns return. Again, the air mass aloft is still extremely warm and dry. Overnight temperatures will probably actually rise back into the 80s over the fire zone simply because that cold air from the thunderstorm downdraft was only a temporary effect. So it's kind of like incompletely snuffing out a candle. You blow it, it smolders, but it can come back. So thanks everybody for joining. Stay safe out there, and I'll probably have another full live session sometime later this coming week. Thanks everybody.